Hello viewers, good morning. Welcome to this session. I am Pramila Singh, Professor of Psychology, Pandit Ravi Shankar Shukla University, Raipur. Today I am going to talk on a very important topic, forgiveness. This topic is important and a lot of research is being done on this topic. Now let us first try to understand what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is not about forgetting. When you forgive someone, you certainly release them from judgment. Forgiveness is in no way requires that you trust the one you forgive. It is not to excuse anything. It's a Greek word and literally means to let go. We forget others when we let go of resentment and give up any claim to be compensated for the hurt or loss we have suffered. Forgiveness is the act of pardoning on an offender or forgiving an offender, but forgiveness, like so many things in life, is easier said than done. It can also be difficult when the person who wronged us doesn't seem to deserve our forgiveness. It can feel like you are letting them off the hook. While this feeling is completely understandable, it is vital to remember that forgiveness allows us to let go of a connection we have to those who have wronged us and move forward with or without them. Sometimes it is hard to remember that forgiveness benefits the forgiver more than the one who is forgiven. Forgiveness is challenging because it's hard to let go of what happened. Forgiving someone who has committed unacceptable behavior can be difficult when we are having trouble letting go of anger or hurt surrounding the event itself. A study found that forgiveness to be positively associated with 5 measures of health: physical symptoms, medications used, sleep quality, fatigue, somatic complaints, etc. It leads to reduction in negative affect, that is depressive symptoms, strengthened spirituality, conflict management and stress relief. All these factors have a significant impact on overall health. A study published in the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin found that forgiveness not only restores positive thoughts, feelings and behaviors toward the offending party. In other words, forgiveness restores the relationship to its previous positive state. But the benefits of forgiveness spill over the positive behaviors toward others outside of the relationship. Forgiveness has been an increasing area of scientific study within the last 15 years and is still considered a young field. Some researchers have attempted to remove forgiveness from being considered a religious concept and have moved it into the laboratory as a psychological topic, while others define it within the world of religious texts. Now, what is the reason or the motivation behind forgiving an offender? Information from the literature review on the motivation to forgive can be organized into 2 domains: social motivation or personal motivation. Researchers who support social motivation argue that forgiveness occurs for the sake of holding society together. Injured individuals are likely to forgive because it is morally wrong not to forgive the offender. Forgiveness within this context occurs for the benefit of the offender. The injured person forgives due to benevolence towards the offender. Similarly, personal motivation is the other domain used to categorize the motivation toward forgiving. Forgiveness is considered for the benefit of the injured person, not for the offender. There is a realization that the feeling and thoughts related to the injury have cost too much in emotional and physical energy to maintain. The injured person has an emotional and cognitive desire to be released from the discomfort of the offense. Forgiveness therefore is considered an opinion or an option rather, because it offers a way to break free both emotionally and mentally from the offender. Researchers investigated forgiveness in close relationships also. People are usually more willing to forgive if they sense trust and willingness to sacrifice for their partner. The authors predicted that forgiving would be associated with greater well-being, especially in relationships of strong rather than weak commitment. They figured that people in highly committed relationships have more to lose if the relationship fails, and so would be willing to make certain sacrifices. They used several methods such as having people fill out questionnaires, recall past relationships and assess their present relationships. What they found was that if people were unwilling to sacrifice at times, if they wanted to exact revenge rather than practice forgiveness, they often suffered conflict, negative emotions and poor abilities to compromise. Psychologists generally define forgiveness as a conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment or vengeance toward a person or group who has harmed you, regardless of whether they actually deserve your forgiveness. Just as important as defining what forgiveness is, equally it is important to understand what forgiveness is not. Experts who study on or teach forgiveness make clear that when you forgive, you do not deny the seriousness of an offense against you. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting, nor does it mean condoning or excusing offenses. Though forgiveness can help repair a damaged relationship, it does not obligate you to reconcile with the person who harmed you or release them from legal accountability. So, forgiveness is very important in working situations also. Without it, reconciliation after conflicts become an empty ritual. Holding grudges after such reconciliations without forgiveness can be stressful for employees and harm their well-being. In the long run, these unforgiven wrongdoings can also deteriorate cooperation within the teams and harm the company's productivity. Worthington used his own 5-step REACH, that is a method of forgiveness. First, you recall the incident, including all the hurt, empathize with the person who wronged you, then you give them the altruistic gift of forgiveness. Maybe by recalling how good it felt to be forgiven by someone you yourself have wronged. And next, commit yourself to forgive publicly by telling a friend or the person you are forgiving. Finally, hold on to forgiveness even when feelings of anger surface. Remind yourself that you are already forgiven. Talking about the benefits of forgiveness, one can feel slightly self-serving, like donating to charity only so you can tell people about it later. But one reason why people might avoid forgiving is that it feels like the offender gets away with something, especially if he or she never apologized. In that sense, at least it's worth considering what's in it for the forgiver, and as it turns out, there is a lot. Worthington says that an 8-hour forgiveness workshop can reduce subjects' depression and anxiety levels as much as several months of psychotherapy would. But beyond that, forgiving people are markedly physically healthier than unforgiving ones. A 2005 study published in the Journal of Behavioral Medicine found that participants who considered themselves more forgiving had better health across 5 measures, and they are physical symptoms, the number of medications used, sleep quality, fatigue, and medical complaints. The study authors found that this was because the process of forgiveness tamped down negative emotions and stress. Some people are quick to forgive, whereas others see only burned bridges. Is there a fundamental psychological difference between those who accept reparations readily and those who do not? And can the unforgiving be brought around? A study from the University of Pennsylvania offers some insight into the psychology of trust, both violation and repair. Psychological scientist Spitzer, an expert on organizations and decision making, decided to explore the idea of trust recovery in the lab. He and his colleagues wanted to see if basic beliefs about moral character influence trust, violation, and forgiveness. They also wanted to see if they could modify those beliefs and in doing so make people more or less forgiving. The scientists recruited a large number of volunteers to play an elaborate game involving breaches of trust and reparations. But before the game started, they primed the volunteers with different beliefs about moral character. Some were nudged to or made to feel that people can change, that people can and do become more ethical and trustworthy if they sincerely set their minds to it. The others were primed with the opposite belief, basically that scoundrels will always be scoundrels. This core belief is surprisingly easy to manipulate, and the researchers did it here simply by having the volunteers read essays arguing for one belief or the other. Now, question arises, although it is very difficult to forgive others. Similarly, the question is how difficult it is to forgive yourself. Forgiveness is usually believed to be a good thing, everybody knows, and while you may be quite generous in your ability to forgive others, you may be much harder on yourself. Everyone makes mistakes, but learning how to learn from these errors or mistakes, let go or move on and forgive yourself is important for mental health and psychological well-being. One therapeutic approach to self-forgiveness suggests that 4 key actions can be helpful. And the 4 R's of self-forgiveness are responsibility, remorse, restoration, and renewal. Let us now take one by one. First is responsibility. That means accept responsibility for your actions. In an article published in the Journal of Counseling and Development, researchers Cornish and Wade suggest that taking responsibility for one's actions is the first step toward authentic self-forgiveness. By taking responsibility and accepting that you have engaged in actions that have hurt others, you can avoid negative emotions such as excessive regret and guilt. Remorse is the second R, that is, allow yourself to feel remorse. Guilt is not always a bad thing. It allows you to think about consequences, feel empathy for others, and to look for ways to improve yourself. The key is to allow yourself to experience remorse without dwelling on unhealthy guilt. Third component is restoration. If you want to forgive yourself, make amends of your actions. One way to move past your guilt is to take action to rectify your mistakes. Apologies if it is called for, and look for ways that you can make it up to whomever you have hurt. Next component is renewal. Find positive actions that will help you move forward. How can you emerge from this experience a better person? What steps can you take to prevent the same behavior again in the future? And forgetting yourself often requires finding a way to learn from the experience and grow as a person. Now let us come to see what are the theories available so far as this concept is concerned. Theories of forgiveness, just as there are a variety of definitions and motivations for forgiveness, there are different theories proposed to explain how forgiveness occurs. Most researchers think forgiveness is a process, but they identify different concepts within the process. Different models of forgiveness have developed from a variety of theoretical perspectives. Three different models of forgiveness we can review here. One is a qualitative model based on Flanagan's interviews, a clinical model derived from Dayton's experience as a clinical psychologist, and a quantitative model developed by Enright and colleagues. After interviewing 70 individuals, Flanagan in 1994 identified 6 phases that an individual encounters during forgiving an offender: naming the injury, claiming the injury, blaming the injured, balancing the scales, choosing to forgive, and emergence of a new self. The objective during the naming phase is for the injured individual to interpret the meaning of the injury and the beliefs surrounding the injury. Claiming the injury requires sorting out which injuries belong to the individual to forgive and which belong to others involved in the offense. This occurs within the context of sorting out, realizing and acknowledging his or her own injuries as a different from those that belongs to others. The claiming phase requires taking ownership of the injuries identified during the naming phase, and he states that major goal of claiming the injury is to stop fighting or running away from the injury. Then the blaming phase is considered the first active phase in this model, whereas the first 2 phases are reflective in nature. The active nature of blaming the injurer propels the injured person forward in the forgiveness process to the next phase. Balancing the scales involves taking back the power of choices. An injury occurs because of the choice made by the offender. An offender's choice took away the power of the injured person or choose. Balancing is described by Flanagan as gaining. Gaining what? Gaining strength over the injury and working towards empowerment. This phase requires actively increasing personal resources and choices that lead to accomplishments. The injured person is no longer the object of the offender's choices, but is making his or her own choices. Balancing is a process that an injured individual goes through to restore his or her personal power. The 5th phase is choosing to forgive or not to forgive him. It is a decision that the injured person has to make. If a person decides to forgive, the decision is for his or her well-being, not for the offenders. The injured person considers forgiveness, so she or he is released from the past, the injury and the offender. She or he moves forward in his or her life. Flanagan describes forgiveness as a move towards self-preservation. That is, deciding to forgive frees individual to choose what they will do with their lives and who they will be in spite of the injury. The decision to forgive brings forth the final phase, that is the emergence of a new self. When an individual is successful in forgiving, there is a change in his or her core belief system. The process of forgiving changes perceptions, behaviors, values and expectations, so that the person emerges with a different set of personal beliefs or core values. Now we come to the next model, that is clinical model given by Dayton in 2003, and this model considers forgiveness a process that is broken down into 5 stages. And these stages are: first is waking up, anger and resentment, hurt and sadness, acceptance, integration and letting go, and reorganization, and final is reinvestment. Forgiveness is considered part of an individual's daily life, not just a process that happens once or twice. During the wake up stage, there is awareness that the resentment towards the offender is having a high emotional cost. When the injured person becomes aware of the price he/she has paid for the injury, he/she moves into the next stage of accepting anger and resentment towards the offender. And these findings of anger and resentment can be powerful motivators to take actions towards change. Being angry is a way of protecting the self from others' feelings and emotions. Recognizing and working through anger and resentment are seen as forward movement in the process of growth and forgiveness. In addition to anger and resentment, hurt and sadness must be felt in order to forgive the losses and that occurred from the injury. Feeling the pain allows grieving to occur and also frees the individual to be able to move towards healthy emotional connections with people. When individuals are willing to deal with the emotional impact of the injury, insight develops. This is needed for the acceptance, integration and letting go stage of forgiving. The injured person becomes clearer on how he/she has been affected by the injury, and there is acceptance and integration of all that the injury involved. After the injury has been accepted and integrated, letting go begins to happen naturally. As a part of acceptance, it is releasing of the past. The injured person is free from the past and can make the choice to move forward. Dayton describes the injured person as emotionally lighter and having renewed stores of energy. During the reorganization and reinvestment stage, the energy freed from integrating and letting go is used to engage in the present and future. The energy can be used to get needs and desires met in a realistic and healthy manner. Dayton describes her model of forgiveness as follows. She says, so forgiveness is really a byproduct rather than an act of will, a letting go or releasing of something we no longer wish to carry, rather than a moral decision made at a particular time and place. Then we come to another model, that is quantitative model. In their quantitative model, Enright and colleagues identified 4 sequence phases of the forgiveness process. They are uncovering anger, deciding to forgive, working on forgiveness and discovery and release. Within these 4 phases, there are 20 identified units that occur. The first phase is uncovering, has 8 units to work through that involve both emotional and cognitive engagement. The first 4 of the 8 units deal with developing awareness and how feelings have been avoided. Then acknowledging anger, recognizing any fear or shame that is part of the injury, and developing awareness of effect on health. And the last 4 units of the uncovering phase involves the injured person cognitively developing insight that there is an obsession with the injury or the offender. During the deciding phase, the individual acknowledges current coping mechanisms that are working, that are not working, begins to consider forgiveness as an option, and then decides to forgive. The decision to forgive leads into the next phase of working on forgiving. The first of the 4 units in the working phase is reframing, which is to rethink the situation or see it with a fresh perspective. The purpose of reframing is done to gain understanding of who the wrongdoer is by reviewing him or her in context. Understanding then leads to the units of empathy and compassion towards the offender. Accepting the pain of the injury and culminates with giving a moral gift to the offender is important. With the giving of a moral gift, the injured person moves into phase 4, that is discovery and release. This last phase is discovery and release, or also identified as the deepening phase. The phase involves injured people finding meaning in their suffering, discovering they have needed others to forgive them in the past, realizing that they are not alone in being injured, becoming aware of their purpose in life, and feeling of decreased negative reaction towards the offender. Fincham and Hall recently reviewed 17 empirical studies on forgiveness in relationships. By their analysis, the studies suggest that when partners hurt each other, there is often a shift in their goals for their relationship. They might have previously professed undying love and worked hard to cooperate with their partner, but if this partner betrays them, suddenly they become more competitive. They focus on getting even and keeping score instead of enjoying each other. They concentrate on not losing arguments rather than on compromise. They use past transgressions to remind the partner of his or her failings. Forgiveness assert, according to Fincham and his colleagues, that it can help restore more benevolent and cooperative goals to relationship. Apart from all these studies, information still lacking within the research field regarding how individuals forgive, reflect on and explain forgiveness. So, a lot of work or research work is to be done on this topic. I hope whatever I have presented before you will help you to understand this particular topic in a better way. I shall be providing you some links and recommend you some further readings or further readings for books for reading, and I hope you enjoyed this talk. Thank you very much for watching this video. Thanks a lot. Thank you.